The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows on the weary faces of shoppers. Among them, James, a man in a faded military jacket, stood out. His eyes downcast, he approached person after person, his whispered plea barely audible. "Could you spare $2 for a meal?" The bustling grocery store became a stage for an unexpected encounter. With each rejection, James's hope dwindled. Unknown to him, this moment would spark a movement, rippling through a nation where over 37,000 veterans face homelessness each night. A familiar face appeared, poised to change the course of James's day and ignite a chain of compassion. The fluorescent lights of the Safeway on 23rd Street in Washington, D.C. buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on James Patterson's weathered face. At 42, the former Marine sergeant looked a decade older, his once proud posture now hunched with desperation. The bustling aisles felt like a battlefield, each shopper a potential ally or enemy in his mission for survival. The aroma of freshly baked bread wafted through the air, a cruel reminder of the hunger gnawing at his stomach. James inhaled deeply, steeling himself for what he was about to do. His hands trembled as he approached a middle-aged woman examining apples. "Excuse me, ma'am," he began, his voice barely audible. "I'm a veteran, just trying to get enough money for a meal. Could you spare $2? The woman's eyes flickered to James, then quickly away. She mumbled something about not carrying cash and hurried off, leaving him standing alone by the produce. A familiar ache of shame and despair settled in his chest. As James moved through the store, the rejections piled up. Some ignored him completely, while others offered hollow sympathy. A few even responded with anger, accusing him of running a scam. For a moment, James was transported back to the scorching heat of Afghanistan. He could almost feel the weight of his rifle, hear the shouts of his fellow Marines. Back then, he had purpose, respect. Now he couldn't even muster the courage to look people in the eye as he begged for spare change. The irony of his situation wasn't lost on James. He had fought for his country, risked his life to protect the very people who now hurried past him as if he were invisible. According to recent statistics, nearly 40,000 veterans were homeless on any given night in America. James was just one face in a sea of forgotten heroes. His mind drifted to the endless hours he'd spent waiting at the VA, only to be told his appointment had been rescheduled. The frustration of navigating a system that seemed designed to fail those it was meant to help. Now here he was, a man who had once commanded respect, reduced to begging for $2 to buy a meal. As James gathered the last shreds of his courage to approach another shopper, he heard the automatic doors slide open. A tall figure entered, surrounded by an air of importance that seemed to part the crowd. For a moment, James's heart leapt with a glimmer of hope. Could this be the person who would finally see him, who would offer the help he so desperately needed? The automatic doors parted, and a hush fell over the produce section. Barron Trump, the youngest son of former President Donald Trump, stepped into the store, his presence commanding attention. At 17 years old, Barron towered over most shoppers, his appearance a stark contrast to the everyday scene. Whispers and curious glances followed him as he moved through the aisles. Some pretended not to notice, while others openly stared. Barron seemed unfazed, his eyes scanning the shelves with casual interest. James, still near the entrance, felt a jolt of recognition. The son of one of America's most polarizing figures was now mere feet away. For a moment, James forgot his own dire situation, struck by the surreal encounter. As Barron moved closer, James felt a familiar resignation. He had faced rejection from so many shoppers. Why would this son of wealth be different? Still, a small flame of hope flickered in his chest. Barron's eyes swept the store, landing on James. Something in the veteran's posture caught his attention. Barron paused, his expression shifting from indifference to concern. James straightened his back, summoning what dignity he could. He had faced enemy fire, but somehow, this moment felt just as daunting. "Excuse me, sir." Barron's voice was soft but clear. "Are you all right? Is there something I can do to help?" The question, delivered with genuine concern, caught James off guard. He had prepared for dismissal, not compassion. "I'm just trying to get enough for a meal," James replied, his voice rough. $2 is all I need." Without hesitation, Barron reached for his wallet and extracted several bills. "Please take this," Barron said, pressing the money into James's hand. "Get yourself a good meal and whatever else you might need." James stared at the cash in disbelief. It was more than enough for a meal. It was a chance to breathe, to plan his next move. "Thank you," James managed, his voice thick with gratitude. "You don't know what this means." Barron nodded, smiling slightly. "It's the least I can do. Thank you for your service to our country." As the exchange unfolded, other shoppers took notice. Whispers grew louder, and phones appeared, capturing the moment. Barron seemed oblivious to the attention, his focus solely on James. The whispers grew, but Barron's gaze never wavered from James. What thoughts raced through the young Trump's mind as he faced a stark reality so far removed from his own? The answer would surprise everyone watching. Time seemed to slow as Barron reached into his pocket. James braced himself for another rejection, his weathered face a canvas of resignation and hope. But something in Barron's eyes told a different story. "Sir," Barron said, his voice steady and clear, "I want to thank you for your service." Barron's hand emerged from his pocket, not with the requested $2, but with a crisp $50 bill. James blinked, unsure if his eyes were deceiving him. I can't accept that," he stammered, his pride warring with his desperate need. But Barron was already pressing the money into his hand, his touch gentle but insistent. "Please," Barron said, his voice lowering. "It's the least I can do. Tell me, where did you serve?" "Afghanistan," James replied, his voice rough with emotion. "2 tours." Barron nodded, his eyes filled with respect. "That must have been incredibly difficult. How are you managing now?" James hesitated, then spoke softly. "It's been tough. The nightmares, the loneliness. Sometimes it feels like no one understands." "I can't imagine what you've been through," Barron said, "but I want to help. Is there anything else you need? Food? A warm coat?" The simple act of being seen, of being acknowledged as a human being, worthy of respect and kindness, hit James like a physical force. Tears welled up in his eyes, and for a moment he couldn't speak. As their conversation continued, Barron pulled out a business card and scribbled a number on the back. "This is the contact information for a veterans support organization," he explained. "They offer comprehensive support, housing assistance, job training, and medical care. Please reach out to them. They're expecting your call." James clutched the card like a lifeline, a tangible symbol of the possibility that had just opened up before him. As Barron turned to leave, James found his voice at last. "Thank you," he said, the words inadequate to express the tumult of emotions in his heart. "You've given me more than just money today. You've given me hope." Barron nodded, a small smile on his face. "Sometimes that's the most valuable thing we can offer each other," he replied. With a final handshake, he walked away, leaving James sitting on the floor, but somehow standing taller than he had in years. A young woman who had witnessed the exchange approached James, her eyes shining with empathy. "Sir," she said softly, "I just wanted to say thank you for your service as well. And I hope things get better for you." As the encounter between Barron and James concluded, a wave of excitement rippled through the grocery store. Customers who had witnessed the exchange began whispering, their hushed voices carrying a mixture of awe and disbelief. The once mundane act of shopping had transformed into a moment of unexpected humanity, leaving those present with a story that demanded to be shared. Within minutes, social media platforms buzzed with activity. Mrs. Henderson, a retired schoolteacher, struggled to type out a Facebook post with her arthritis-stiffened fingers. "I just saw something extraordinary," she wrote, her eyes misting over as she recounted the scene. At the checkout counter, Tessa, a college student working part-time as a cashier, overheard snippets of conversation from customers waiting in line. The story grew with each retelling, taking on a life of its own. As night fell, the story continued to gain momentum. Local news stations interrupted their regular programming to report on the grocery store angel, as Barron was quickly dubbed. Social media platforms exploded with hashtags like #BarronsCare and #VeteransMatter. However, as the story spread, details began to morph. One viral post claimed Barron had offered James a job at Trump Tower, while another insisted he had promised to build a new veterans shelter in the city. For James, the sudden attention was overwhelming. He found himself unable to sleep that night, tossing and turning on his makeshift bed in a nearby shelter. The kindness he had experienced was touching, but the spotlight left him feeling exposed and uncertain. Years of blending into the background had not prepared him for this level of scrutiny. Dr. Emily Rosenthal, a professor of media studies at a nearby university, watched the story unfold with keen interest. "What we're seeing here is a perfect storm of virality," she explained to a colleague. "It's got all the elements: a high-profile figure, an act of unexpected kindness, and a societal issue that resonates with many Americans." The rapid spread of this story demonstrates how a single moment can capture the public imagination and potentially spark larger conversations about important issues. As the story continued to spread, its impact began to ripple outward. Local veteran support groups reported a surge in calls from people asking how they could help. Social media feeds that were usually filled with political arguments now overflowed with messages of hope and calls for greater support for veterans. The viral moment had tapped into a collective desire for compassion and action, transforming a simple act of kindness into a catalyst for broader social change. As the nation celebrated Barron Trump's act of kindness, a darker truth lurked beneath the surface. The viral story of one veteran's encounter with the former president's son had captured America's attention, but it barely scratched the surface of a national wound. Beyond the heartwarming headlines lay a reality far removed from the momentary, feel-good narrative. In the shadow of this viral moment, countless veterans across the country continued to struggle in silence. The contrast between the public's outpouring of support for one veteran and the systemic neglect faced by thousands was stark and unsettling. Marcus Jennings, a former Army sergeant who returned from his third tour in Afghanistan 4 years ago, exemplified this struggle. "I came back to a country I didn't recognize," Marcus shared, his voice barely above a whisper. "My skills didn't translate to civilian jobs. My marriage fell apart, and before I knew it, I was sleeping in my car." The statistics painted a grim picture. The unemployment rate for post-September 11th veterans stood at 6.5%, significantly higher than the national average. On any given night, over 37,000 veterans experienced homelessness, with countless others teetering on the brink. The Department of Veterans Affairs reported that an average of 17 veterans died by suicide each day, a sobering reminder of the mental health crisis plaguing those who had served. Sarah Cortez, a former Navy corpsman, watched the viral story unfold with mixed emotions. "It's great that people care," Sarah said, her eyes distant. "But where's that care when we're fighting for our benefits or waiting months for a doctor's appointment?" For 2 years, Sarah had been battling the VA to receive treatment for a service-related injury. The disconnect between public sentiment and political action was glaring. Recent budget cuts had forced the closure of several VA hospitals in rural areas, leaving veterans like Marcus to travel hours for basic medical care. Funding for mental health services had been slashed, resulting in longer wait times and fewer resources for those battling PTSD and depression. In communities across America, local organizations struggled to fill the gaps left by inadequate government support. Food banks reported a surge in veteran visits, while homeless shelters strained to accommodate the influx of former service members. These grassroots efforts, while commendable, highlighted the systemic failures in veteran care. As the initial wave of inspiration from Barron's Act began to crest, a question hung in the air. Would this moment of national attention translate into meaningful change for veterans? The viral story had inadvertently shone a spotlight on a crisis that had long simmered beneath the surface of American society, challenging the nation to look beyond a single act of kindness and address the broader, more complex issues facing its veterans. The nation's collective conscience stirred, awakened by the unlikely encounter between a struggling veteran and a young man born into privilege. What began as a simple act of kindness in a grocery store aisle had ignited a firestorm of compassion and outrage across America. Social media platforms buzzed with activity, hashtags like #Veterans Crisis and #Remember Our Heroes, trending for days on end. The story of James Patterson, once just another faceless veteran grappling with poverty and invisibility, had become a rallying cry for change. In coffee shops and community centers, on college campuses, and in corporate boardrooms, conversations about veteran support dominated. People shared stories of their own encounters with struggling veterans, of family members who had returned from service only to face an uphill battle in civilian life. The collective guilt of a nation that had allowed its heroes to fall through the cracks was palpable. Grassroots efforts sprang up across the country. In Seattle, tech professionals launched a crowdfunding platform for veteran-owned businesses. Rural Kentucky farmers offered job training in agriculture. These initiatives addressed the multifaceted needs of the veteran community. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a veteran affairs expert, warned, "While the surge in support is heartening, we must be cautious. Rapid influxes of resources without proper infrastructure can lead to mismanagement and raised expectations that may not be sustainable long-term." Existing veteran support organizations found themselves inundated with offers of support. The American Legion reported a 300% increase in new memberships. Donations to veteran-focused charities skyrocketed, with some organizations seeing their annual budgets double overnight. Politicians face pressure to take concrete action. Senator Miranda Reeves introduced a comprehensive bill to overhaul the VA system and expand mental health services for veterans. Celebrity chef Gordon Ramsay announced a nationwide initiative to train and employ veterans in the culinary industry. For James Patterson, watching his personal struggle morph into a national conversation was surreal. From his room in a veteran's transitional housing facility, he followed the unfolding events with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "It's like I'm watching a movie about my life," he confided to his roommate, a fellow Marine battling PTSD, "but I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop." As the movement gained momentum, the question lingered. Would this surge of goodwill lead to lasting change or fade like so many viral sensations before it? The ripple effect of one act of kindness continued to spread, touching lives in unexpected ways. In James's hometown of Akron, Ohio, a local car dealership offered free basic maintenance services to veterans. A nearby community college established a scholarship fund for veterans pursuing higher education. These small but significant gestures began to weave a safety net of support that had long been missing. As the initial wave of enthusiasm receded, the true magnitude of the task ahead came into sharp focus. The viral moment that had captured the nation's attention was fading, leaving in its wake a sobering realization. Transforming a fleeting act of kindness into lasting change would require more than hashtags and heartwarming headlines. In the weeks following the encounter between James Patterson and Barron Trump, a flurry of activity swept across the country. Politicians introduced legislation, and community organizations launched new initiatives. But as the dust settled, the challenges of implementing these efforts became apparent. Dr. Amelia Roth, a psychiatrist specializing in veteran mental health, cautioned against quick fixes. "The challenges facing our veterans are complex and multifaceted," she explained. "We need to address the systemic issues that have led to this crisis in the first place." Marcus Jennings, a former Army sergeant, shared his frustration with the VA system. "It's like a maze with no exit," he said. "We need a complete overhaul of how we support our veterans after they come home." As the initial fervor subsided, a more measured approach began to take shape. Senator Miranda Reeves navigated the complex waters of Washington politics, pushing for a comprehensive bill to overhaul the VA system. The media's role in sustaining public interest proved crucial yet fickle. Initial wall-to-wall coverage gave way to sporadic updates, reflecting the ebb and flow of the news cycle. Barron Trump's continued involvement brought both benefits and complications. His platform helped maintain awareness, but critics argued that his efforts risked oversimplifying the complex issues at hand. On the ground, local organizations reported a sustained increase in volunteer applications and donations. Sarah Cortez, a former Navy corpsman, found herself at the forefront of this effort. "We're grateful for the attention, but now comes the hard part," she said. "How do we keep people engaged when the cameras are gone and the tweets have stopped?" As weeks turned into months, some initiatives faltered while others gained traction. In Seattle, a tech-driven crowdfunding platform for veteran-owned businesses continued to grow. The Rural Kentucky Coalition of Farmers expanded their job training program, partnering with local community colleges. James Patterson, thrust into the role of reluctant spokesperson, used his newfound platform to advocate for systemic change. Barron Trump remained engaged, his involvement a constant reminder of the encounter that sparked the movement. As the one-year anniversary approached, a sense of cautious optimism prevailed. While challenges persisted, there was a growing recognition that meaningful change was possible. The road ahead remained long, but the sustained efforts of individuals, organizations, and policymakers offered hope for a future where veterans received the support they deserved. As the sun set on the anniversary of that fateful day, the city hummed with newfound energy. The kindness between Barron Trump and James Patterson had ignited a spark that refused to die out. Across the nation, conversations about veteran support evolved into action plans. Yet for every success, veterans still struggled. The movement revealed layers of complexity demanding attention. Volunteers prepared shelter beds, knowing the battle for stability continued. James reflected, "I hope this inspires others to see beyond labels and reach out to those in need." The narrator asked, "What will your act of kindness be? How can we build a society where no one feels forgotten?"